Hello, and welcome to this webcast called You've Got Mail, but Do You Really Get It? This webcast will be presented by John Haxton, Head of Research at OPP, and he will discuss the latest research into type and email usage, and will give us some tips on how we can use our knowledge of type to improve communication by email and reduce the stress of dealing with email. My name is Nikita Dost. I'm a consultant at OPP, and I'm here to introduce the webcast and to support John in answering your questions. The webcast is going to take 45 minutes, including a few minutes for questions at the end. You can send in your questions at any time by using the questions box below your screen. And I'll collate these and ask these to John at the end of the webcast, as many as we can get through. We will also ask you a few poll questions throughout the webcast, and John will be explaining exactly how to answer those. You'll see them pop up at the bottom of your screen. This webcast will have some graphs in it, so if you want to make your screen full, you can hover over the bottom right corner of the screen and you'll see a couple of arrows to make it into full screen. And to come out of that, you can also click the arrows again and that will come out of full screen. So just to remind you, this recording will be available afterwards and it can be accessed via opp.com/webcasts. I'll be back later on, but for now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. John Haxton is the head of the Thought Leadership and Research team at OPP. He is a chartered occupational psychologist and has been working with the MBTI since 1997 as a practitioner, facilitator, and researcher. So now to hand over to our speaker. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Nikita. Thank you very much for that introduction. And yes, welcome to everyone to this webcast, which is indeed all about email. So in the next 40 minutes or so, we'll be doing two things. First of all, we're going to look at the results of a survey that we carried out to look at how our personality, our psychological type, affects what we think about email and how we use email, and also how all this relates to how stressed we are by email. And then we're going to use those results to show you how you can use email better and how perhaps you can help others to do so too. Now, one of the reasons that we've chosen to look at the link between MBTI type and email is that email is pretty central to most people's working lives. So here's some stats for you. I think Nikita may have mentioned there's going to be a little bit of stats in this presentation. Last year, 2.6 billion people were using email across the world, and over 200 billion emails were sent and received every day. That's 20 million emails, and over half of these were business emails. So email seems pretty important to many people. But how important is it for each of you? Let's find out. In a moment, you should see appear on the bottom of your screen a question. And that question will be, I could not do my job without using email. Now, if you have made the screen into full screen, you'll need to double-click on those arrows again to get the question back, I'm afraid. But once you've done that, you should see a question appear at the bottom of the screen. And what I'd like you to do is to answer that question. To what extent do you agree or disagree with that statement? So please choose one of those options from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we're getting a few answers in there. I think we've got quite a few more to come. So do put your answers in there. I think you can see already where the answers are. But if you haven't already answered, we're going to give you about another 20 seconds or so to have a go at answering out. Keep a note of these, Nikita, because we'll see what we think about these results in a second. Okay, and the numbers are going up, but percentages are staying quite similar. I think you can probably see that on your screens as well. We're going to close the voting in just a second. So if you've got any last takers on putting your answers in, and we're going to stop voting now. Okay, so as I think you can probably see on your screens, just over half the group strongly agree with the idea that they couldn't do a job without using email, and another 27% agree. Nikita, does that surprise you at all?
It doesn't surprise me, because in this day and age, everyone is using email, aren't they, for their jobs? So, and a lot of people who are listening to this webcast are probably the same, since they are listening to a webcast after all.
I'd imagine so. Now, I did mention that we're going to be looking at the results of our survey as we go through this webcast. And if we compare your results with the people who did our survey, actually, they are very similar. In our survey, only 4% strongly disagreed, 7% disagreed, 5% were unsure, and all told, 84% agreed or strongly agree with your statement, which compares with yours, if I got the numbers right, 79%. So very similar. An email, it seems, is an important, in fact, probably an essential part of many people's working lives. So let's go on then to look at the results of the survey and what those results can tell us. So to gather data, we set up an online survey. Survey was anonymous, so I don't know if any of you took part, but if you did, well, thank you very much for contributing. And the sort of questions we asked were around things like the amount of emails that people sent and received, what devices they used for email, what preferences were they had using email, how email stressed them, and what were the best things and the worst things about email, and we also asked people their type. Overall, 368 people completed the survey, which, as you can see from numbers, isn't exactly a representative sample of the British or any international population, but we did have enough people of each MBTI type to look at how differences in personality preferences affect how we use email. Now, we've already asked you one of the survey questions about how important email is in your working life. Let's go on to ask you another. So once again, you should see a question appear at the bottom of your screen, and that question will say, how many work-related emails did you receive yesterday? And once again, you have 5 options, this time 0 to 10, 11 to 25, 25 to 50, 51 to 100, or, for the lucky some of you, more than 100 emails. So if you'd like to place your answers there, I'm going to give you another half minute or so to put your answers down. Okay, so those responses are starting to come in. Quite a lot of you haven't voted yet, so this is your chance to let us know how busy you are, how stretched you are by emails. Okay, no one yet, I think, according to my results I'm seeing live here, in the 100 plus emails. 100, so let's, so none of you happy to do more than 100 emails. We're going to close the survey in just a second, close the question in just a second. So one last chance to put down your answers. And we're going to stop voting right now. So the biggest percentage of you there, with 25 to 50 emails, that roughly half of you, in fact, for my graph, exactly half of you in our group. Again, Nikita, what do you think of those results?
Well, there's no lucky people with over 101 emails, so
yes.
It looks like that most people are receiving between 10 and 50 emails a day.
Yeah. It could be, of course, for those people, if anyone is receiving 101 emails, they're just too busy to actually do this webcast.
Yeah, they're busy answering their emails, not listening to a webcast.
And emails, as we will see later, can be quite stressful. If we compare what your answers with the answers of the people who completed the survey, actually, they're quite similar. For the people who completed the survey, actually, for them also, the average number of emails received was 26 to 50. And actually, the people who took part in the survey may have had it a little bit easy, as the worldwide average last year, according to other research, was nearer 90. and the average number sent by our survey group was 11 to 25 emails each, where the worldwide average was 34. But of course, this research is all about how our personality affects how we use email. So let me ask you to think about something. What aspect of our personality might influence how many emails we send and how many emails we receive? The answer, of course, is extroversion and introversion. Extroverts send significantly more emails than do introverts and, possibly because of this, receive significantly more too. Now, we'll come back in a moment to personality differences in how people use email. But before we do, let's look at some of the things about email that are true for nearly everyone. The survey included 65 questions about email, which people answered on a 5-point scale from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. And that's the scale you can see across the top of the graph there. Here then are some of the statements that almost everyone agreed with. Now, even though the survey was entirely anonymous, there may possibly have been just a degree of social desirability in the way people answered the questions. Given, for example, that most people agreed with the statement, the work-related emails I write are always polite. Now, if I'm brutally honest about myself, I try to have polite emails, but if I was to say that they're always polite, I'm not sure I could necessarily 100% agree with that answer. Here's the statements that most people disagreed with. Now, if you look at those statements, it sort of implies that most people are quite structured and careful about how they use email. The top line of the graph, we've actually abbreviated to get it on the chart. In full, it would read, if I don't check my emails at the weekend, I will worry about what might be waiting for me at work on Monday. And the bottom line would in full read, at least once, I have caused myself or my organization significant embarrassment by sending an email to the wrong person. And as you can see, very few people have agreed with that. So again, there may be just a bit of an element of social desirability coming in here. So there are some aspects of email that everyone, well, most people agreed with. But how does our personality affect our views on email and how we use it? We asked every participant to let us know about their personality by giving us their psychological type as measured by the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Now, the MBTI looks at 4 areas of personality, at whether you have preferences for extroversion, or for introversion, for sensing, or intuition, for thinking, or feeling, and judging, or perceiving. Let's look in more detail at each of these and at how personality affects how people use email. So starting off with extroversion, introversion. This is all about our energy and our focus. Extroverts get their energy from and focus their attention on the outside world of people and things. Introverts focus on their inner world of thoughts and reflection. When it comes to email, extroverts, well actually, a lot of the time they'd rather communicate face-to-face than emailing, and many will feel that actually email is used too much when people instead could talk face-to-face. Something that introverts may agree with, but are a lot less likely to agree with. Introverts, in contrast, will sometimes use email to avoid confrontation, and that's something that extroverts may not always understand. Sensing and intuition is about information. What sort of information do you prefer to use? And people with a preference for sensing prefer information that's real, that's actual, that's based on their past experience, from the evidence of their 5 senses, and also detail. That's why the small picture there is of a zoomed-in camera at the left-hand side. Intuitives at the right-hand side prefer to look at the big picture, at how things connect and at possibilities, and the big picture idea is why we've got this zoomed-out camera on the right-hand side. Now, on the left then, sensing people tend to be more structured and organized in how they use email. They tend to feel they can use email efficiently and use all the features of it. They can't always concentrate on their work if they know they've got emails sitting there in their inbox, and get irritated if emails don't have a clear point of them. Intuitives or a bit more casual or less structured in how they use email. They are certainly less bothered by unread emails and may even sometimes take an email break or an email holiday during the working day. If we move on then to thinking and feeling, this is about how we make decisions. Thinkers make decisions by stepping out of a problem and trying to take an objective, logical approach. Those with feeling preference are more likely to make values-based, people-focused decisions. When it comes to email, both types, thinkers and feelers, value efficiency, clarity, getting to the point, but thinking types value these significantly more. People with a feeling preference, though, can be sometimes quite offended when emails miss out pleasantries like a greeting at the start and a regards at the end. Finally, judging and perceiving looks at the way we prefer to live our lives. On the judging side at the left, people prefer a planned, structured, organized approach, getting from point A to point B, as you can see in the picture. Those on the perceiving side prefer to live their lives in a more spontaneous and structured, open way. Sometimes the journey, perhaps, is more important than the destination. Now, although most people expect a relatively quick response to emails, people with judging preference are more irritated when they don't get this. They're likely to respond to emails fairly quickly themselves, and so sometimes they may spend some time waiting for emails from others. They find it difficult to ignore notifications, and they're less likely to be able to concentrate on their work if they've got unread emails in their inbox. People with a perceiving preference are less structured in how they use email. So, for example, they'll often either not use a subfolder structure, or sometimes, because they know it's what they're meant to do, set up subfolders and then not use them. They're relatively relaxed about having unread emails in the inbox, and sometimes it can take them quite a long time to respond to emails. So there are differences then between extroversion and introversion, sensing and intuition, thinking and feeling, and judging and perceiving in how we use email. But those of you who already know a little bit about type in the MBTI will know that what's really important in looking at our personality is how these four letters combine dynamically together to describe the whole person. And the way in which these four pairs can be combined gives us 16 possible types. So, for example, someone with preference for introversion, sensing, thinking, and judging would have a type of ISTJ. That's at the top left of the type table, the typees table at the right-hand side. And going on from that, each of these types has a particular core character, taking the lead in directing their personality, what's often called their dominant function. So the ISTJ and ISFJ, for example, at the top left of the type table, introverted sensing, the conserver, at the top left of the core characters table, that's their leading core character. Central to these people's personality is the importance of lived experience and drawing on their rich store of memories. For ENTP and ESFP, it's, I beg your pardon, ESTP and ESFP, it is extroverted sensing, the activist experiencing the moment, the here and now of all their senses. And so it carries on for all types, for extroverted intuition, so introverted intuition, visionary, for extroverted intuition, the explorer, for introverted thinking, the analyst, for extroverted thinking, the director, for introverted feeling, the conscience, and last but not least, extroverted feeling, the nurturer. Now, one of the reasons why we're looking at these core characters is that there are significant differences between them in their attitude to emails and the way they use email, and we've used these differences to help us to create guidelines that can help people of different personalities to use email better. Now, there are too many of these differences to talk through in this webcast, but here are just a few examples. In this chart, at the left-hand side, you have some of the questions in the survey, which respondents, again, answered on a scale from strongly disagree. That's a score of 1 on the scale at the bottom of the chart, to strongly agree, a score of 5 on the scale at the bottom. The coloured bars show the average score for each core character group for that question. The longer the bar, the more likely it is that that group agreed with the question. So for the first question, for example, too many people use email when they could talk face-to-face or via the phone. Activists, dominant extroverted sensing, the top green bar, they are the most likely group to agree. And visionaries, dominant introverted intuition, the shorter yellow bar for that question, are the most likely to disagree. Although actually, if we look at that particular question, you can see that actually all the extroverts, all the extroverted groups are more likely to agree than all the introverted groups. So really, extroverted introversion is the effect that's coming on here. For the next question, it annoys me when people do not put a subject line in an email. If those people with a dominant extroverted decision-making function, directors and nurturers who are the most annoyed, introverted feelers for conscience, they aren't so bothered about this. Going on to the next question. Directors are particularly annoyed when emails don't have a clear point of them. And on to the next one. Explorers aren't too bothered when they have unread emails, but conservatives can get quite run up by that. And finally on this page, explorers are the most likely group to set up subfolders, but then not use them. Now, as well as this data, there are two other pieces of research that we use to put the guidelines together. So first of all, we asked people in an open-ended question, what's the best thing about email? We then categorized their answers, and this is what we found. So the aspect of email most often put down as one of the best things was about flexibility. The idea that you can use it with anyone, anywhere, anytime. Also is quite quick. Some people particularly like the idea that it allows you to have an audit trail. It allows clear communication. Some people just wanted and liked the idea that they could sit down and compose their thoughts before communicating. Some people actually prefer email. You can send attachments, it keeps people informed, and it allows you to maintain connections. Now, although there are some common threads in what people said, there are also differences between different core characters. So, for example, the idea of flexibility, of being able to use email with anyone, anywhere, anytime, was particularly likely to be mentioned by extroverts, especially activists, as extroverted sensing, and nurturers, as extroverted feeling. Introverts often mention the possibility of having time to compose their thoughts, especially visionaries and consciences. Now, of course, we also ask people, what's the worst thing about email? And this is what we found. Top of the list, junk email, mentioned by an awful lot of people. Also the idea that emails can be misinterpreted when it's used instead of face-to-face communications, receiving unnecessary emails or too many emails, having to use it all the time. The fact it's time-consuming. The next two sort of contradict each other. People who don't reply to my emails, or people who expect immediate replies to their emails, it can be distracting, and for some people, even overwhelming. Now, when we look at the personality differences, the core characters, actually you'll see that when it comes to what people hate about email, there's actually not so much difference between people with different personalities. There's actually a lot of commonality in things like a dislike of junk mail, for example. There's one final research area we should look at before we look at some guidelines, however. And that, of course, is stress. Now, there's a lot of research out there suggesting that email can be stressful, but there's not much looking at how this relates to personality. So we included some questions about stress in the survey. And I'm going to ask you to complete one of these questions now. So once again, you'll see a question appear on your screen, towards the bottom of your screen. Remember, if you've gone full screen, to put the arrows back. And the question you see is, I often find work stressful. Is that something you strongly disagree with, unsure, agree, or strongly agree? So if you'd like to put your answers now, we give you about another minute to put those down. So we've got a few responses so far. I should probably assume at this stage that we're not going to do anything with this data afterwards. So you can be open on how stressed we are. We're not going to track you down and offer you free stress counselling or anything. Okay. About another 20 seconds, and then we'll close the survey down. Do please put your answers down. Okay. And we're going to give you about another 10 seconds or so. I'm not going to give you a countdown because that in itself perhaps will be somewhat stressful. I'm going to close the voting in just a moment. Give you another few seconds to place your votes. I'm closing the survey now. So it would appear from the voting that actually almost half of the group would disagree that they often find their work stressful, and another 8% strongly disagree. So it looks, Nikita, as if we've got a group of people who, on the whole, with some exceptions, because it is a small number of people who strongly agree, on the whole don't find their work too stressful.
Maybe they've listened to your stress webinar recently and they've got some tips. We do have a little bit of a mixture.
We do.
So there are some people who agree they often find work stressful, and some people who strongly agree. But on the whole, it looks like people slightly less stressed in general.
It does. And actually, if we compare that with results from the survey, in fact, you as a group, on the whole, are slightly less stressed than the survey group, which is, I think, probably good news. So we asked that question. We also asked a number of other questions. So we asked people to answer the question, my working life is quite stressful at the moment, and that's how people answered that one. Dealing with email is stressful for me, and I sometimes find email overwhelming. So we took, for each person in the survey, we took their score across each of those 4 questions. We added those up to give each person an overall stress score, and then we compared that score with all the other data we had in the survey. And this is what we found. So we found that, in particular, the people who are more stressed are the people who send and especially receive more work-related emails. Personal emails didn't affect this one way or another, but sending and received more work-related emails, they were more stressed. People who send and receive more emails in the evening, at night, before going to work, or on holiday, those people were more stressed. Now, on the next bullet point, I may need to apologize to some of you, because if you're someone who works in a large organization, who are in a senior or middle or management position, and or work in management or HR, those people were more stressed in our survey. And when it comes to their views on email, the more stressed people were likely to feel they waste a lot of time dealing with email, sometimes take days or even weeks to respond, get distracted by email notifications, think that they don't use email efficiently, feel they're not in control of their working life, and believe that they are sent a lot of necessary or irrelevant emails. Now, of course, for all these factors, we don't know for sure whether these cause stress or caused by stress. Sometimes it might even be both. So, for example, you might start to take days or even weeks to respond to emails because you're stressed, but then the fact that you're taking so long might increase that stress and stress you out further. Now, when it comes to personality, there's a slight suggestion in the data that perceiving types may in some ways be more stressed than judging types, but there's no significant difference in the overall stress score and no significant difference for whole type or core characters. It looks as if, on the whole, no one type is significantly more stressed than any other type. Now, this surprised us slightly because previous research has suggested that introverts may, on average, for various reasons, be more stressed in the workplace than extroverts. But as you can see from this chart, there's only a very small difference between the stress score of extroverts and that of introverts, and this difference wasn't statistically significant. But then we thought, hang on a moment. We know that sending and especially receiving more emails leads to stress, and we also know that extroverts typically send and receive more emails than introverts. So we looked at the data in a little bit more detail. Now, for people who did not receive many emails, there was not a significant difference between extroverts and introverts. Amongst people who receive 26 to 50 emails, everyone gets a bit more stressed, but introverts were significantly more stressed in this group than extroverts, and that difference gets even bigger for people who receive more than 50 emails. We did a little bit further analysis on this, and it suggests that it's those people who have a dominant introverted judging function who are most affected by this difference. That's ISTP, INTP, ISFP, and INFP. So we've spent a little bit of time looking at the data and looking at what it tells us. We do have an in-depth research report which goes through all of this in a lot more detail, and we'll tell you at the end how to access that report. But finally, let's look at what advice and guidelines we can give for using email given the results of the research. Now, I think sometimes guidelines are presented almost like a magical recipe. And if you only follow the instructions exactly, everything will be perfect. But of course, life isn't like that. And one of the things we do know is that different people at different types do things differently and have different needs and expectations. But having said that, I think there are some general guidelines that we can suggest that people follow. First of all, send fewer emails. The more you send, the more you receive, and that's stressful for you and everyone else. Secondly, respond quickly. People vary in how quickly they expect to reply, but try to respond within 48 hours or within a week at maximum. Thirdly, be clear, concise, and correct. Most people like clear, concise emails with a subject line so they know what it's about, and many get irritated by errors. Then, take care with chains and copying. Our research does suggest that most people will still read an email even when they've been copied in, most of the time, but as they become stressed, they're less likely to do this, so your email may just not get read. Many people also will become irritated when they have to scroll through a long email chain to find the information related to them. So in general, think about what you are sending, who should be in the to line, and who should be in the CC line. Then, stick to the working day. If you can, and I know it could be difficult depending on your job, avoid sending or even checking work-related emails on holiday, at a weekend, late at night, or in the evening. Now, that might not be realistic, given your job, but try to have at least some time email-free to reduce stress. Then, be polite. Other research suggests that if you do, your recipients will feel more positive about you and actually see you, for those who have a thinking preference, who may be less worried about politeness, actually see you as more competent. And last but not least, think about your audience. Given your own MBTI type, it may be that you have a particular approach to email communication that may or may not match the needs of your audience. And if you're wondering about what those needs might be, Well, let's look at these now. So let's start off by looking at the activists and the conservers. Dominant extroverted sensing, dominant introverted sensing. ESTP, ESFP, ISTJ, and ISFJ. So for activists, our advice to you is, first of all, try not to skim read emails. I know life may be a bit too short, but do try and read emails fully if you can, because if not, you may miss some important information. Do check that you've sent all the emails that you actually started. One of the things we found is that sometimes activists write lots of emails and don't always get around to sending them. And do give people time to reflect on the email that you sent them, especially introverts, before you're expecting a response back. Now, if you're communicating with activists, try to keep those emails short so they'll read them. Respond quickly, and actually, if you can, don't use email. If you can, it's really nice to respond face-to-face. Pardon me. And don't expect them to check emails at weekends. For the conservers, introverted sensing, one of the things our research suggests is conservers can be quite distracted at times and find it difficult to concentrate on their work if they have email notifications popping up. So you may consider turning off those notifications from time to time. Remember that email isn't the only way to communicate, and if you get no response to an important email, do follow that email up, because not everybody is quite as vigilant about reading all the emails as perhaps you are. If you're communicating with conservers, do avoid bombarding them with lots and lots of emails. And if you don't get a response, and you normally will, it may be a sign that they're becoming stressed and overwhelmed. And once again, don't expect them to check emails at weekends. In general, these people quite like, if possible, to keep the work life and the home life quite separate. Moving on to intuition, explorers, ENTP, ENFP, and visionaries, INTJ and INFJ. For the explorers, extrovert intuition. If you're an explorer, remember email can be useful. It has its needs. You don't necessarily have to talk to people face-to-face. Don't set up subfolders if you know you're never going to use them. Why bother in the first place? Life's too short. And if you can't respond quickly to something, do consider sending people a holding email. If you're communicating to explorers, do consider meeting them face-to-face instead of using email. And if you do really need a clear answer, make it really clear. And try to avoid putting them in a place where they have to check email outside of working hours. For the visionaries often want to compose their thoughts and put things in place and get that email really right. If you can't respond quickly because of that, do consider sending in a holding email. And remember, sometimes a call or face-to-face meeting might be preferred by other people. When you're communicating with visionaries, do avoid bombarding them with emails. They may sometimes take time to respond because of thinking through and composing their thoughts, but actually once they've done that, it's gone, and they may want a quick response back from you, so be ready for that. And again, don't skim read the emails because they probably put quite a bit of time and effort into composing that email. For thinking, directors and analysts, for directors, if you're a director and someone takes time responding to your email, remember that they actually might be thinking through how best to answer your email, not ignoring things or procrastinating. If you notice mistakes in emails or the emails that don't come to the point, try to be tactful about how to point that out to people. And once you get stressed, you may become rather too direct, even rude perhaps occasionally, so be aware of that possibility. And if you're communicating with directors, do try and send clear, concise emails with a subject line and a clear point to them. Respond if you can quickly to the emails. And remember, if a director sends you an email outside of normal working hours, it might be urgent, but it isn't necessarily urgent. For analysts, introverted thinking, Again, analysts often like to think through their emails, so if a quick response is necessary, do consider sending a holding email. Remember, email may not always be the ideal platform for debate or for argument. If you're communicating with analysts, make it clear if you need a quick answer and why you need it. Make sure emails have a clear point. And again, don't skim reader emails because they will tend to spend some time composing them. And last but not least, the feeling types, nurturers and consciences. So nurturers, extroverted feeling. Remember, if you're a nurturer, if people omit pleasantries for hello and goodbyes, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are meaning to cause you offense. When you're responding quickly to things, do take time to double check the content and that you send it to the right person. And remember, not everyone always wants to meet face to face. When you're communicating with them, do include pleasantries. Do respond quickly to the emails, or at least acknowledge you received it. And again, try to avoid bombarding them, especially outside of working hours. And finally, for introverted feeling the conscience, as one of these people, if you can't respond quickly, do consider sending a holding email. Do be clear and concise, and of all the groups, this is the group most likely to forget to include the subject line. So don't forget to do that, because some people, as we've seen, could be really wound up by that. And when you're communicating with these people, don't forget to include those pleasantries. And if you do need a really quick response, politely mention how much you, as a person, would appreciate that. We're coming now towards the end of our time together. It's probably useful for me just to mention that there are some other resources you can draw on. And you can access these by clicking on the Attachments tab towards the bottom of your screen. There's a much fuller research report which goes into these findings in much more detail. We're also developing a quick guide, similar to ones we've done for other areas in the past, but it isn't quite ready to be published yet. It will be out in October, and we will send you an email telling you when that's ready. Something else to remember is that there are many exercises that you could adapt to email. So, for example, the type and communicating exercise, which is a free download for those people who are MBTI qualified. We can adapt that to use for email quite straightforwardly. And we've touched on, I think, a number of things as we've gone through, such as stress, such as core characters, and there are various other resources available, some of which we've put links to in the attachments folder. But I think that's the end of the time for the actual delivery of the webcast, the content. So we have a little bit of time for some questions, I think.
Yes, we do. So thank you, John, for sharing that with us. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So our first question is, you said to answer emails face-to-face with some core characters, particularly activists. So would a telephone be a better option than an email when face-to-face isn't possible?
Typically, yeah. So one of the things we asked for some questions in the survey, pardon me, we said face-to-face, others we said telephone or face-to-face, others we said telephone. And yeah, so the more you're connecting with those person's senses, the better, I think.
Yeah, and I do know a few activists and nurturers out there that do prefer the odd phone call rather than an email myself as well.
Sometimes even a less odd phone call.
Pardon?
Sometimes even a phone call that isn't very odd.
Yes, exactly. And then another question we had was, I noticed that you didn't talk about functional pairs, and I wondered why, as these are usually central when we talk about communication.
Yeah, so some of you will already know that the functional pairs, we'll often talk about those when we're talking about persuasive communication in particular. So the functional pairs, for those of you who don't know, are the columns of a type table, so ST, SF, NF, and NT, the way we take in information and the way we make decisions. We actually have put some information about that in the full report. There wasn't really time to cover that in the webcast as such. But there is some more information in the report. One of the things we did find, though, however, when we looked at the totality of email, and in particular how they use it and organized it and what things irritated them or what they thought was good, actually the core characters gave us more useful information.
Thank you, John. I think that's all the time we have for answering questions at the moment. So this is just a reminder that these slides are available. A recording of the webcast is available only at the end of this webcast, and it's available from opp.com/webcasts. And that's available for you to listen to and run through the slides. So thank you for listening, and that's about time for me to say goodbye and have a good day.
And thank you from me also. Thank you for listening, and I hope it's been useful. And as I said, do look out for the quick guide heading in your direction in October. Thanks again.